Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar, where we're going to be talking about how startups and founders can better enhance and optimize their content strategy, how they're building and publishing content in today's world, taking into account a lot of the changes that are happening around us due to the current climate. And I'm very much happy and excited to introduce our guest here today, Mazen Alul, who's the founder and CEO of WebQuest. And WebQuest is a digital agency that's based in Dubai, and they specialize in search engine optimization in English and Arabic. So they specialize in SEO specifically, and they've done a lot of great work and research when it comes to SEO applying to startups, as well as Arabic SEO and that business opportunity that is highlighted as well. Mazen has worked with hundreds of websites over the past 6 years, including some of the largest across the MENA region. And prior to that, he's had extensive experience when it comes to communication as well as technology. Mazen, I'm very, very much excited to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to the insights and the advice that you're going to be giving our founders here today. And just to start off, I know I've been getting a lot of these questions from our founders and from our startups here at Sharjah, asking about how does the current climate affect digital behavior, right? How does it affect how consumers consume content and how they're behaving in that digital space? And I'd love to kind of get your input on that.
In terms of online behavior, looking at numbers, and I'm running a study that I should be publishing in the next couple of days. The interesting part is seeing shifts in behavior and consumption online in the websites we work with. So, for example, we've seen a drop in mobile browsing and an increase in desktop browsing. Once you think about it, this makes sense. People are home. They're spending more time on their laptops. They're not traveling as much, and therefore not using traveling and moving around as much, and therefore not using their mobiles as much. So there definitely is a drop in mobile traffic to certain websites, or most websites, and an uptick in desktop traffic. There's also a change in the time that people are coming into these sites. So we're seeing, for sites that have been very active during the week, we're seeing that focus shift to weekends and more towards later hours in the day. So sites that showed peak traffic hours around 3 p.m., 4 p.m., 5 p.m. During weekdays, it's shifting to between noon and 8 p.m. on weekends, and even more towards later in the evenings on weekdays. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, even midnight, that we haven't seen before. So even user behavior is shifting as well.
Yeah, that was actually very, very insightful. So thanks for sharing these insights, and hopefully that's kind of useful to some of the people attending today's session. And as you were thinking, or as I was thinking about this earlier, one thing that we preach in Shara and we push our founders to do is to be able to develop their business to be customer centric, right? And to base a lot of the decisions that they make in their business model, in their product, in their revenue strategy, to revolve around the customer, their needs, and to be able to do that, you need to be able to kind of collect different data points about your customers. And so one question that I had for you is, how can startups and founders kind of make sure that they have the certain basics covered when it comes to the foundation that they need in order to build that customer-centric data collection mechanism for them to be able to action and develop strategies and plans that will serve their customers, as opposed to basing it off of a gut feeling or a hunch in that sense? What's kind of like a quick check that founders can do?
Yeah, there's quite a few. So, I mean, the principle is you can't improve what you're not measuring. So when it comes to your online presence, your website is by far your most important asset. Your social media presence is important, of course, but you don't own those channels. You don't own Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter. So whatever they decide to change in their algorithms will affect the visibility of your brand or your channel. So those are good channels to have. I'm not saying not to, but what I'm saying is not to rely 100% on them. Your website, on the other hand, is something that you completely own on your own, and it's up to you what you want to do with it. So that being said, what I strongly recommend having on a website from the start is your Google Analytics. So you need, at least with a basic installation with Google Analytics, just to install that and to see what's happening on your site. It just helps you measure where people are coming from. Are they coming in from search? Are they coming in from social media? Are they coming in from email campaigns or any other mechanisms? What kind of pages are they looking at? How much time are they spending? So on the basic level, those questions can be answered. The second step, the next thing to configure is something called your Google Search Console. This is also free. It's another free tool by Google, but I think it's extremely important to set that up because this is how you see the performance of your website from a search engine perspective. So Google Analytics, again, is what's happening on your website, regardless of where traffic comes from. Google Search Console is how Google as a search engine sees your site. And that's essential for your search engine performance, your organic search performance, what kind of searches you're showing up for, you know, where these traffic, what kind of devices people are using, what kind of searches you're showing up for, where you're showing up, are you on the first page, second page, third page, etc. So these are really important data points. And the issue with Google Search Console is that it will not start collecting data until you configure it. So that's why you should configure it as soon as you put up your website. If you haven't done that already, I highly recommend you do that today. So maybe in the future, you want to focus on SEO or anything else, you have that data presence that you can start analyzing and building decisions on. So those two, I think, are very important. If you are a local business, like you have a physical presence, a Google My Business profile, this helps show on Google Maps. Set that up. It might take some time to verify that presence. You might need to follow up a few times until you get the actual verification happening. But those are the basics, I think, that should be there that allow you to measure and see what's happening, and based on that, make decisions on how to improve.
Definitely. And I think just as you were kind of mentioning those, we're going to be sharing them with the audience. So we're going to be posting these tools that the Mazen has just shared with you guys. And I just want to invite the audience to just kind of briefly in the chat tell us if you have used these tools, then what was your experience with them? If you've had any challenges, what's your experience with them? And if you haven't, I think it's also interesting to know what was kind of stopping you if you were already kind of familiar with those tools. Which brings me to my next question, Mazen. And typically at an earlier stage, a lot of the startups that we work with in Sharjah it's a smaller team, it's a smaller founding team. And it could be that the founder or the CEO doesn't necessarily have isn't necessarily a tech savvy person, or doesn't come from a technical background in order to kind of set up and find their way around these tools. What I wanted to kind of ask is that how, and just this is to kind of share with the audience, is how technical are these tools? Because I think the other thing is that founders are afraid to tackle these kind of analytics tools, thinking that they're too technical, that they get lost. And some of them are slightly maybe more complex, or they're more detailed. But I just want to kind of get your thoughts on that, on how can founders that don't necessarily come from a technical background approach this exercise?
Yeah, good question. So I think the first thing is the setup process. It's really easy for a developer to do this. You can learn within half an hour of reading on how to do it. But if you built up a website, whether it's on WordPress or Squarespace or whatever platform that was used, adding Google Analytics is a simple copy paste of a small number of code lines that are requested. So yeah, I think it's important to set that up. It takes, for a developer, it takes 5 minutes to set those up. Here's another very important point that I see happen time and again, is you as a business owner need to have created those accounts yourself. Far too often we see that the developers or a third party creates those accounts for a website, and then for whatever reason there's a fallout, or they disappear, or they travel, or they leave the country, and what happens is the business owner no longer has access to their own data. So what I would say is make sure that you create those. All you need is a Gmail account or a Google enabled account if you're using G Suite. So create those accounts yourself. The Google Analytics and Google Search Console, they're free. You just need Gmail, and then you give access to the developer to install it or to run it. It's not complicated. However, when it comes to reading this information, the basics are very visible. It just gets complicated, or more and more complicated, as the website grows and the traffic increases. But you should be able to read the basics on these easily. But I think the important point for me is that you as a business owner have ownership to these yourself, and don't rely on a third party, because we've seen it where people have disappeared. And it's very hard to, especially for Google Analytics, it's hard to get that data back. And a lot of times you simply have to start from scratch.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we've seen these cases as well, as we work with different startups, and I think we've kind of covered some of the foundation that will enable founders and will enable startups to kind of start tracking and start getting information and build that customer centric mindset. But moving back, or taking a couple of steps back, more in terms of strategy and plan, typically when it comes to specifically content, there's two kind of general scenarios, right? You're either a startup that's using content as a marketing tool. However, your core product is not necessarily content. And you also have startups that are focused, and their business model revolves around producing, creating, and managing their content. And I think you've touched on some of the things that that have changed in terms of consumer behavior earlier in the session. And I just wanted to kind of get an understanding from you on a broader sense. How does this apply in both cases, right? So when it comes to startups that are using content as a marketing tool, as well as startups that are whose business model is solely revolving around creating and building content, how does this consumer behavior change affect how they go about creating and building content? Actually, does it affect it at all? Should startups or founders continue doing what they've been doing previously? Or if it does affect or impact how they should be creating or building content, what are kind of how do you see that happening?
Great. So again, I have several points on this. First thing, considering the current circumstances, people are in a lesser position to buy. There's a lot of uncertainty, so they're not as outgoing as buying as they used to. So what people are looking for in terms of content now is something that's useful to them. And I think that's always a general rule of thumb, is what's always useful to your target audience. But for now, since most people are homebound, what is useful to them being home? So I've seen, for example, a website that usually creates couple experiences, so the outside events as a married couple, what can you do? Right now, they just shifted the focus to what can you do since you're home together. Another website, what are games that you can play with your kids, again, without a lot of cost. So taking into consideration the current circumstances, what you're offering and your target audience, it's at the end, it's what's beneficial for them for the time being. In terms of content generally, if I were to go a little bit back to strategizing and approaching, As I said, your website is your main asset, and um, that's where content should reside because you own that space. What we typically do is, in terms of content development, is we write blogs. So whatever you're selling, there are always questions about the service or the product that you are putting out. People always have questions. How does it work? What does it do? How can I use it? Comparing it versus something else. And these are always good to answer in a blog section on your website. So publishing written content is one. You can write that piece, put it on your website, and then share it on your social media channels. Um, what that helps from a search engine perspective is Google is very good at understanding text. It can build relationships. It can make analysis based on text. It's not so good in understanding um, pictures, for example, or videos. I'll get to videos in a minute. So what I always advise is to commit to writing at least one blog post a month at the minimum. Um, that answers the questions that people have around what you do, what you're selling. Now, here's a very good website. It's called answerthepublic.com. So I can share it here in the chat. So what this website allows you to do, I'll put it on the general chat. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, I think we can do that as well.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
what Answer the Public does is you just type in a topic. Let's say I don't know, toys at home, and it will give you all the different kinds of questions that people are asking about that topic. So it gives you a lot of good ideas about blog posts to write and topics to write. So this falls under the written content perspective. When it comes to videos, and this is a growing space. So in terms of social media presence, the algorithms are prioritizing video content versus written content, right? So when you log into your LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, you're seeing video content come to the top of your feed more and more often. So having video content, I think, is also useful. It depends, again, on your industry, what you're doing. But with video content, what I would advise you also to take a step further is to publish that on your website and transcribe the text. So there are tools out there that if you give them a video, they'll give you the text with 90% plus accuracy. So utter.io is an example. You throw in and the free version is good for up to 600 minutes a month, I think. So you throw in a video link and it spits out the text with very good accuracy rates. So publishing this on your blog post as well, your blog section on your website as well, is helpful. So you have a video, you created that, but as I said, is Google does not understand what the video is. So having that text below it helps the search engine understand what you're talking about, the content, analyze it, which helps in your search results. And at the same time, from a user experience perspective, that video is on the top of the page, so they're not bothered by the text below it. If they missed something or want more details, they can go back and read the text, but it remains as a video there as well. So this is on a generic level.
Thank you. I'm just so just as a note for all the participants and all the attendees for today, we're putting in all those links and the tools that Mazen is sharing on the chat. So feel free to kind of refer to that, use some of those tools. I know I've used some of them and they're definitely very, first of all, they're very easy to use. So they're kind of intuitive in that sense, but also they're very useful in terms of the value that they deliver. And as you were talking, Mazen, I was thinking that a lot of founders, and we get this question a lot, because there was a time where blogs were all the rage, for example. And then you have podcasts and videos, and you have a lot of ways to kind of, regardless of what your business model is, to kind of engage with either your end user or your direct customer segment. And I think one kind of common pitfall that we find founders do is that they tend to go after everything, right? So they start a blog, and then they start a podcast, and then they start making videos. Just wanted to kind of quickly get a sense from you and kind of get your thoughts on that. How can founders understand specifically what kind of content works with their audience? Should they be going after every type of content generation method? And obviously, a lot of that I know kind of goes back to tracking and collecting information about your target customer and your audience. But how can founders kind of make a decision or kind of prioritize a lot of those a lot of that content being generated?
Very good question as well. So I think it's primarily the question is is your target audience and where they are. And definitely it doesn't make sense, especially as a startup, to go after everything. We just don't have the bandwidth capacity budget to do so. So you have to be smart about what you choose to put out as content and where your target audience is. So another interesting tool is called SparkToro. It's a new one. So this one is rolled out. I'm not sure if they rolled it out completely yet, or it's still in beta testing, but it's up and available for people to test out. It's by the same founder of Moz, for those people in the digital space. So SparkToro allows you to see the interests of your target audience and where they are digitally. What do they follow? What do they read? What do they consume? So it's very interesting to check out. But back to the question of, I think the most important thing for you is to understand who your target audience is and what their online behavior is like. So if you're, for example, into a product that targets moms, a visual product, then maybe Instagram is that primary channel. In our case, since we specialize in SEO, we're mainly on LinkedIn and Twitter because the SEO community is on Twitter. And again, I use Twitter to learn and stay updated on news more than marketing. But it's LinkedIn that I found in terms of publications and incoming leads. That's where my target audience is. So I think it's crucial that you understand who it is that you're selling to and where they are in terms of their online presence. The next step would become, the question would become is, how do you engage them with your content? So an example of one of our clients, they're into training. So first aid training, for example. For them, their target audience are a lot on Instagram. So they were doing a lot of Instagram videos about certain tips, training tips, how to do certain things. And with that, they were able to drive a lot of traffic to their websites and sign up to their training programs. So it's back to the point of who is your audience, and in terms of their digital presence, where are they? And based on that, you craft the type of content that they're interested in consuming.
Thank you for that, Mazen. And I think just because I want to touch on this and make sure we dedicate some time to this in the session, a lot of questions that we get from founders and from startups that are in our community specifically do revolve around SEO and setting up SEO for their websites and for the content that they build out. And on one side, it's definitely something that's very beneficial. On the other side, I think there's a particular, and I'm actually interested to get your thoughts on this. If there's a particular stage or time or a particular kind of condition where SEO makes sense to actually pursue and invest money in. And if so, what are those conditions? How do you kind of make sure that you're not necessarily investing time and money in something that you might have be slightly earlier for? Because there's a lot of content that's available online that talks about the importance of SEO and how it can help drive businesses, regardless of what sector or what your business model is, if you're B2C or B2B. However, it's not
setting up SEO and optimizing SEO is not necessarily something, it's not an easy task to do, right? It's something that requires a lot of knowledge about your customers, and it takes a lot of research to maintain and optimize for. So I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that for founders that are currently kind of thinking about that decision, or trying to decide, is this the right time for me to invest in SEO? How does it work? Do I set it up and it kind of runs organically, or do I need to have a dedicated resource for this? So just your thoughts on that.
Yeah. All right. So the analogy I always give about SEO, it's like going to the gym. So SEO is a long-term strategy. Meaning that if you start doing SEO now, it takes several weeks and months for it to start showing effect. Exactly like when you go to the gym. If I hit the gym now, I will not see results tomorrow. I have to be consistent at it, methodical and consistent at it to start seeing results. Within 2, 3, 4 months, I can see the results start to show up. Also, the moment I stop, I don't lose that fitness, right? It stays with me with some time, and then it slowly starts declining again. And SEO is pretty much the same thing. The biggest factor that determines how fast you go up or how fast you go down is how active are your competitors. So again, from an SEO perspective, it's a long-term strategy. Now, back to the point of user behavior before I can address what you can do as a startup and a founder. So from user behavior, if you think about us, whenever we're looking for something, we go to Google, and I say Google because that's a dominant search engine in this part of the world. We go to Google and we Google it, we look for it. Versus when we are on our social media channels, our mindset is different. So when we go into our social media channels, we're not looking for something specific. You want to see what your contacts are doing, what your friends are doing, what they updated on news, depending on the channel you're in. But that initial step towards that product or service doesn't exist on social media, whereas it exists on search. So think of search as a pull strategy, because in your marketing funnel, that searcher took the first step in your direction. There's an intent of whatever they're looking for, if it's some information or a product or a service. Versus social media, it's a pull strategy because the user did not take that step. Sorry, it's a push strategy on social media because the user comes into the channel and then you push the advertising on them. So when it comes to SEO, if you have a website, I would advise that the first thing that you can do and stay consistent at is to publish a blog. Have a blog section. Commit to writing one every now and then. It could be one a month, once every 2 months. It could be, again, with Answer the Public. You always have a very large set of questions that you can pull on. It could be the most common kinds of questions that your clients are asking. It could be a small video demo of something. It could be a case study that you've done. From a search perspective, again, as I said, Google understands text pretty well. So writing about what you do and the service or product that you offer is key. And that helps Google understand what the site is about and also start showing it up for more and more relevant searches. So my advice as a starting point would be to have an active blog section and publish written content on a consistent basis. And consistency, again, can be every few weeks, once or twice, or once every month or two. That's fine. I think that's on the basic level. Now, as your website and online presence grows, and of course your revenue stream grows, then you can look into SEO as something, as a strategy that can open up a broader audience to you. I don't advise it for somebody, for a specific service or product that just started. There's more important things for you to focus on and put your budget on. But what you can do on your own level is to publish that content on a consistent manner. And then once you have your Google Analytics configured and Search Console configured, 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, you have a good amount of data that you can go back to with the help of an SEO professional, or if you learn it on your own, that's also possible. But you have a good enough amount of data where you can look at it and see what the trends are, where you stand versus where you want to stand, what the gaps are, and move from that direction.
Yeah, and I think you've touched on a lot of great and very kind of practical advice for the founders out there. And I just want to kind of take the time and diving a little bit deeper, because you recommended, for example, setting up a blog post, regardless of kind of the frequency that you decide to kind of put this on. I think the key here is consistency. And when it comes to generating that kind of content or building out that kind of content, I mean, I know when I, for example, search something informational on YouTube, you have kind of ultimate guides and beginner guides and a lot of kind of tips and on how to do literally anything that you can search on. And at some point, and especially in some areas, it kind of becomes slightly too saturated, right? It becomes a listing exercise, and every list is bigger than the other. And that's my experience in terms of a lot of the informational blog posts that are out there. And what I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on is how do you recommend founders go about this exercise? Is this a strategy that works? Should all their blog posts be informational? If so, how do they go about writing them? Does it make sense for them to hire, for example, a freelancer or a part-timer to do this? Or is this an exercise that the founder needs to do first, figure out a formula that works, and then pass that on? How do and I'm asking these questions for founders that are currently kind of considering, for example, starting out a blog post or publishing things. How do they go about that process?
All right, great. So I think a good starting point is that answer the public, because that really gives you a lot of ideas about what to write out. More specifically, what questions are being asked about the topic that you just researched. In terms of writing it out, if you can afford to hire a freelancer to do it, fine, go ahead, do that. If not, and you want to do it yourself, go ahead. I think the most important thing is to have something up versus not having anything at all. And you'll just get better and better at the process. So for example, I also use utter.io. So sometimes I have a lot of thoughts in my mind, and I don't type as quickly. So with Utter, I just speak it out, and then it just transcribes what I'm saying, and then I go back and edit it. So that's another mechanism that I use. So Google Docs also has a speech to text functionality. That's pretty good, but I found Utter to be more accurate at this stage.
That's actually a great idea. Thank you for sharing that. I know that's very useful for a lot of founders.
And I use it as well when I finish a meeting, and when you used to finish the meeting and driving back, for example, to home or the office, I open Utter and I just blurt out my thoughts, so that when I get back home or back to the office, I have some sort of points that I don't want to forget. So whether they are to follow up on the next meeting, or action items, or ideas that popped into my mind, or just points for a case study or a blog post, I found Utter to be Utter, and again, Google Documents speech to text functionality to be very useful in that case. So back to the question, I think the most important thing is to just put content up on your website. I wouldn't worry too much about it being perfect at this stage. You just get better and better at it. Just do a little bit of high-level research, see what people are interested in. You can also ask your clients, what interests them, what kind of topics they're interested in, what questions they have, and write about it. From our experience, what we found is the more specific we are in the questions that are being answered, the more interaction we're finding in the target audience. Again, writing something that's generic probably will not catch or click with a lot of people out there, but writing something that's very specific to specific / useful to what you're offering, what you're doing, and your target audience, even if it's read by 10 people, but these 10 people are people who know or want or interested in your product. And the conversion rate for that is much higher than writing something that's open up to the generic audience.
Yeah, I think these were that was very useful. And just to kind of catch up anyone that has joined recently, a lot of the tools that Mazen is talking about or sharing, we've put up on the chat. So go ahead and use them and utilize them. They're very useful tools, and they're very intuitive tools, actually, in terms of usage and how you can make use of them in your business. The next thing that I wanted to actually kind of touch on or talk about, because we've been talking about blog posts and written content just now, and I think just to kind of answer some of the questions that some of the founders have regarding other type of content. One thing that you mentioned, for example, is transcribing video. So if you're doing video content, try transcribing them for Google to be able to kind of analyze that text and make recommendations to your audience whenever they're searching accordingly. I wanted to kind of just quickly get your thoughts on audio content, right? So podcasts and things like that. How, because is it the same logic to video content? How do you recommend founders leverage that type of content during this period or regardless in general?
Yeah, I think it falls under the same category for video. So podcasts in specific are something that are growing in popularity over the last couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years. And from a perspective of benefiting and leveraging that content, I would also advise to have it as of course you need to figure out your podcast publishing space. I haven't done it personally, so I'm not sure what you can use to publish the podcast. But what we've helped some of our clients do is, again, back to the transcription. So when they create a podcast, same as what I recommended with a video, you transcribe it and then you publish it as a blog post. So the podcast is on the top of the page with an option to play it directly from the web page. And then the text is transcribed below it for search engines to understand it. And that also helps with the website itself. Does that answer the question?
Definitely. And I just want to kind of give a nudge to the audience and anyone that's listening to kind of share their questions. I think it's very valuable to have someone of Mazen's experience and expertise on the topic. So while we have him for the next hour or so, please do ask your questions, get them out of the way, and have him kind of answer them for you. And before we kind of move onto Q&As or wrap up the sessions, I think one thing that I wanted to also touch on, and that's more specifically in terms of kind of next steps. I think one thing about entrepreneurs is that they have an experimentation mindset kind of ingrained, right? And that's what makes for successful entrepreneurs, not to kind of generalize, but generally whenever we work with startups, we try to enforce and preach that experimental and experimentation mindset. And apart from executing or doing that initial step of starting to generate content, regardless of what type of content it is, I think one thing that's very, very important is to be able to build in some kind of a feedback loop, right? For founders to kind of step back, look at how their content is performing, how their websites are performing, and be able to make changes accordingly. And I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on that when it comes to content and when it comes to certain tools and things, because they happen at a high frequency. So for example, with blog posts, if you're publishing one on a weekly basis, there are even some websites that post blogs on a daily basis. How do they, or in general, even how do founders kind of build in that feedback loop? At what rate do they need to kind of look back at the performance and then re-strategize in that sense? And if so, how do they kind of go about doing that? Are there particular things that they need to look out for in terms of metrics or analytics or so? How does that process look like for founders and startups?
So yeah, I think the first point is, let's just try and visualize the whole process. So I have a topic in mind, could be anything. For example, let me say, I'll reflect this on SEO. For example, SEO for startups, for example, and I go punch that into Answer the Public, and I have a 50, 60, 70, 80 questions, whatever. I take maybe 5 of them that are relevant for me at the time. I write a blog post that answers these questions. I can add like an introduction and a conclusion, and then I publish it on my website. This is where the setup of Google Analytics and Google Search Console come in. So on Search Console, I can see what happens to that specific page in terms of the searches that it starts to show up for over time. So this is not immediate. It takes several weeks for this data to start build up. So on that angle, I can see what kind of searches, how many searches that specific piece has showed up. All right, so I have this understanding in terms of search, what am I showing up for, and how popular is that search. On the second hand, since I published this on my website, I can go ahead and share it on my social media channels. And the beauty about publishing blog posts is that you can take a piece and just repurpose the titles inside social media and use it every few weeks, right? Especially if you put up a guide, a how-to or a guide or something along these lines. You can just write a more creative title and share it on LinkedIn again, or share it on Twitter again, or share it on Facebook again. The same piece, just use it again. So on that, you have two areas. So within each social media platform, they offer their own analytics or insights that shows you, how popular was this, the interaction, the demographics, the days of the times within the day, etc. But also on your Google Analytics, you can see how much of that has trickled back to your website. How many people actually went from that piece and came back to your website, and what they did on your website. So once you have, for example, 3 or 4 or 5 different pieces of content, you can get a very good idea of what people are interested in. Which ones had more tractions, which ones showed up for more traffic, which ones had more readability, or how much more did people spend online for each article. And that would give you a good idea of what to do next. From our end, depending on the size of the website, we usually do like a keyword research or topic research every 6 months. On average, for smaller sites, every 3 months. For bigger sites, it's a bigger content schedule with an end goal. But for more startups, I'd say every 6 months is good. And then once you have those, you can again measure what's happening on them from different angles, see what's working, what's not, and adjust.
Definitely. And just as you were kind of talking about how that feedback loop kind of depends on how big the website is, or the volume of content that they put out. Just one question that I kind of had in mind is a lot of these tools, and it could be, for example, if I'm, let's say I'm in the startup phase, and I'm talking about startup education, for example, it's a very big, or it's a decent enough audience size, right? However, if your target audience, for example, are could be new mothers that live in maybe rural areas in a very specific with a very specific income and ethnicity, so on and so forth. My point is that if you're targeting a niche with your target audience, and you're actually playing within a very specific kind of persona or a very specific niche, how does a lot of what we talked about apply? Does SEO make sense in that in that regard? Is there a particular type of content, or is there actually no difference in terms of what content you should be putting out? And that's specifically for startups and founders that are targeting a very particular niche.
Yeah, good question. I think um, it, it ties into what your long-term strategy slash plan is. Um, it could be that your target audience are not online, right? So, or don't use Google or don't have that access as much, then the whole marketing strategy just becomes different. Assuming they are online and they are consuming some sort of digital presence, then at the end of the day, your website is what matters to you, as I mentioned, because that your social media presence is highly dependent on these platforms and how they change their algorithms and what they say is allowed or not allowed to do. So for the long term, I think SEO always works, provided that your target audience is online one way or the other, or just at the very basic level, searches for information online. It might not be something that you want to focus on immediately now because your target audience or your immediate selling capacity is to a limited number of people who you can reach through networking, for example, or different other mechanisms. But once you start looking at growth and where you want your product or service to be 6 months down the line, 1 year down the line, 5 years down the line, then scaling up that process would highly depend on your digital presence. And then the sooner you start building up that presence, the better it is for you on the long run. So even on the last few years, we come across a lot of companies, well-established companies, and actually especially in this period right now, where they relied heavily on traditional sales, having shops in malls, and I'm talking big brands, where they relied on people walking into malls and buying their products. Right now, they're realizing, oh God, we don't have an e-commerce website, we can't sell anymore, etc. And they're into hyper rush mode of crunching out an e-commerce website to sell out their products. So I think having that digital presence and building it up with time is essential. And part of that strategy is your SEO, of course, and your social media. And breaking that down further, it's heavily reliant on content. So back to my point of at least producing fresh content on a regular basis would be helpful.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to, I'm conscious of the time, and I want to make sure that we get time to kind of answer all of the questions that are being posted. And just before we kind of wrap up and move into the Q&A, I just wanted you to kind of share any kind of high level takeaways, and just to kind of wrap up a lot of the points that we've discussed about, or to recap on them. One of the valuable things that Mazen has shared earlier in the session had to do with consumer behavior and the shift in how consumers and customers consume content, given the current condition and the current climate. And then we spoke about kind of like a quick checklist or foundation that startups need to have in terms of tracking in order to build that customer-centric product or business model. And the key to that is to obviously kind of collect information and have certain data points about your customer. And Mazen has shared valuable tools like the Google Search Console, Google Analytics. And then we moved on to kind of talk a little bit more about specific type of content, where it applies best. How can founders decide what type of content to start generating and start creating? And I think a lot of in general, when we talk about the current climate with COVID-19 and how this has affected businesses and startups specifically, I think it's very important to also understand what are the main takeaways, because it could be that this is something that's going to continue for the next couple of weeks, next couple of months. It's hard to kind of put a timeline to this. However, the most valuable things I feel that founders can walk out of this with is kind of key lessons and key takeaways that they can then implement in their startup, regardless of what situation it's facing. And I just wanted to kind of pick your brain on that and understand what you think founders should be kind of keeping an eye on in order to take away learnings and take away lessons from the current climate.
I think it's difficult to answer. I can tell you what I'm doing. So I'm looking at different behaviors, right? Because you're looking at what you want to do is look at signs of things starting to ease up. And again, this comes back to what you do and what you sell. So from our end, I think for most of March and maybe the first few days of April, I can say everything was on freeze mode. Like people took a step back and were defensive, and then there was not much interaction happening for our business. In the last week or two, last week 10 days, we started getting inquiries from different kinds of websites. And I think, to me, this is a sign that, some people have seen this, accepted this as a this is a situation for the time being. What can I do about it? And that it's just that level of acceptance. And then I think what comes after is looking at these different signs of, all right, things are starting to slowly open up again. The appetite to buy for certain things is coming back. And I think based on what you do and what you provide, just tapping into that audience and see where they stand. Are they still in defensive mode? Are they looking at opportunities again? What is, where do they stand? I think that's also key. It's just having that conversation. So something what we did on our end as well is I tried to reach out to as many of our ex-clients as possible, just to see, if there's something we can help. So it's back to building that relationship. It's not selling at all. It's just like, hey, is everything okay? Touching base, is there something we can help with? And out of that, some good conversation came out. I think that's where we stand at the time being. It's an unprecedented time, and there is no manual or a guide or anything on how to do this. It's just being observant, being courteous. People are looking for help at this point, or just in some cases, someone to talk to. So just, I think the key from my end is being observant on behavior, what's happening, and tying that into where you want to achieve also, because sooner or later things are going to turn around. And then when they turn around, the question is, how ready do you want to be to capture that market? Whether it's in a month or 2 or 6, but where do you want to be when things start turning around? And from my perspective, it's what we're looking at as well in terms of internal processes and procedures. What can we do better now that we have a little bit more time to reflect internally on important things to get done?
Yeah, and I think I think that's a very, very valuable kind of takeaway for founders, because and this definitely applies on a professional level and a personal level, because a lot of good learnings come out of reflecting, whether you're reflecting on yourself as a founder, or your business and your startup, or your customers and your relationship with them. And thank you for ending kind of wrapping up the discussion on that note, because that's very, very valuable and important for founders. And I just want to kind of move ahead and kind of tackle some of the questions we've been receiving. One of the most interesting ones that we've received had to do with how to tackle analyzing your performance when it comes to content, right? I think there's a lot of push regarding okay, now consumers are spending more time at home, they're consuming content more, they're on their devices more, for way much more than previously. And so a lot of founders are kind of focusing on traffic as a metric at this particular time. And I think specifically when we talk about content, engagement is also a very important metric. And I wanted to kind of quickly kind of get your thoughts and answer that question on which is kind of more important to focus on, or is it a balance? How do you, or does it depend on what stage you are at as a startup? Do you focus on traffic and driving as much traffic, putting out as much content as possible to generate that traffic, or do you focus on engagement and building that out?
All right. To that, I don't think there's one straight answer. So usually I take a step back and say, what is your objective? Meaning, what is it that you are selling? Are you selling a service? Are you selling a product? Do you have a subscription-based model? So it's very different based on your objective. So back to, for example, our case, we are a service-based company, right? So we offer SEO, whether it's consulting or campaigns. So I'm not selling anything online. What I'm looking for is that inquiry to come in or that lead to come in, right? So that's one type. Another type is if you're selling directly online for a product, for example, then you're an e-commerce based platform. A different type can be subscription based. So like you create a lot of content and then you sell advertising space, or you have a premium version of that content that's subscription based, and you have a lot of free one. So I think under each one of these business objectives, the strategy behind what kind of content you put up is also different. So in terms of, for example, for a service, there's a certain level of know-how that we'd like to share, right? So this is how you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you offer a certain level of information, guide, etc. For it could be also research for your audience out there that they find useful. But also the message is, we're the experts here. So if there is more information, or if you want to dive deeper, get in touch with us here. So that's from a service level. From a product level, people like to review products and their capabilities or their features. They also like to compare, when you look at, for example, TVs, this TV versus that TV. So the kind of content you produce there is along these lines. It's, again, to help the end client make that decision. Here are the features, here are the benefits. This is how you do this. This is how you configure that. Here is a comparison between these two products. So that's what you produce over there. On the third aspect, when it comes to subscription-based, it's information-heavy content. So more along the lines of definitions, relationships between different things, news. So yeah, it just depends on what is it that you're doing, because your objective over there is to provide a lot of content for free and then have a more premium one for paid. So I think it just comes down to what it is that you are selling and what your long-term objective is. Are you looking for a lead? Are you looking to sell? Are you looking to maximize traffic? Because based on that objective, you go down the different routes of what kind of content do I need to create or look at for my target audience.
Thank you for answering that. I'm just going through some of the questions that are being sent across, and I think we have a member in the audience that's very interested in the research that you've talked about earlier. So I know you've kind of mentioned a couple of things about it, but if you can kind of just share with us a little bit more about what you're working on in terms of the study, and where can we find it for people that are interested in knowing more about that topic?
Yeah, so if you don't mind, I can share in my Twitter profile and LinkedIn profile. I'll be pushing that across as soon as putting it out. So hopefully publishing it probably on Saturday or Sunday as I wrap it up. So I can put this in the main chat. So this will be my Twitter profile, my LinkedIn. Please feel free to connect. I'll be sharing it on this as well. If you want me to email it to you, please send me a message on LinkedIn. I'm happy to email it. I don't have any sort of emailing newsletter or anything of the sort. It'll be a personal email to you saying that, hey, you were interested in this. Here's a link to the report as well if you're not active on these channels. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Definitely. Yeah, and just moving on to some of the other questions that we've been receiving that has to do with the talent that you're hiring when it comes to creating content. I think the founder's question revolves around, is this something that, how involved should the founder be when it comes to creating content specifically at the earlier stage? So is there something that founders can do in order to translate a lot of what they want out of the content to, for example, the freelancer that's doing it, the content writer or the copywriter that's doing it? Or is this something that needs to be done specifically by the founder? Does it matter in that sense, specifically at an earlier stage? Or what's your advice regarding that?
I think if you are hiring a freelancer to do this, I think it's very, very important that you convey what you want and what you expect at the beginning, so that things are moving in the right track or moving in the direction that you want to move in. So your involvement, at least on that initial stage, is crucial, because the downside of that is you want something, the freelancer understood something different. They moved in a direction, they came back to you with something that you didn't like or was not what you were expecting. So that back and forth will cost you a lot more in terms of time and effort than if you had that first conversation from the start. So I think it's very important to align properly on expectations, how you want things done. So spend that extra half an hour at the beginning saying, this is what I'm looking for, as detailed as possible as you want, whether it's written or on a phone call or a voice note, whatever. It's just important to have that at the beginning, so that when the end product comes out, it's what you're looking for, and you don't spend a lot of time going back and forth, fixing and adjusting. If this is something that you are doing yourself, just do the proper research at first. And then, as I mentioned, there are a number of tools that can help you out. If you're not someone who likes typing, you can transcribe, you can use Utter for voice to text functionality. That's how I started, at least. Yeah, just figure out something that matters. Is there another part of that question that I missed?
No, I think you actually covered it very well. And I think the next question that we've got that's very interesting had to do with Arabic content, right? So when it comes to startups that are either producing Arabic content or it's service or product based, but for an Arabic speaking audience. How important is, or how different is the content generation and production cycle there? Or even when it comes to things like SEO, how does that play out? How is that different when it comes to Arabic content?
So if that's what you're looking at, congratulations, you're ahead of the curve. So what we've seen in the last few years is that the landscape when it comes to online presence for Arabic is sadly, it's really a very sad statistic. So on the one side, there's a lack of quality Arabic content on the internet. We're far behind. The flip side of this is it's a massive opportunity for people to start producing good quality content in Arabic, because from a search perspective, competition is minimal. So you can start ranking quickly for that. What we've seen over the last couple of years is, or last 3-4 years, is there's more and more Arabic content in the big industries. So for example, fashion, sports, news, medical, you're seeing more and more bigger websites move into that space. However, when you look at products, for example, in local businesses, there isn't much. It's still a big gap. So if you're in that space and your target audience is Arabic speaking, I would say that's something to start looking at immediately. Also looking at the demographics of the region. So again, 5-10 years ago, most of your Arabic content was found under forums. Again, very low quality content, just question answers and a lot of spam. Right now, again, you're seeing properly structured websites with good content being produced. In terms of user behavior, so again, depending on where your target audience is, in the UAE, Arabic demand for Arabic content is not as big as English, of course, just because of how the demographics are, but it's there, especially among, for example, the young Emiratis, for example. Their online presence is in Arabic as well. Also in Saudi Arabia, it's heavily in Arabic, not as much in English. Maybe on certain business level products, very specific business level product, you can see that there's only English demand for that. But also, I guess my point is, depending on where your target audience is, the landscape of Arabic content is just beginning. So the opportunity to produce good content and rank for it without a lot of effort, without a lot of SEO effort, just putting the content on your website could be good enough for you to rank, simply because not a lot of others are looking in that space. For this specific, I actually ran something, a study, I want to say 8 months ago. So in the Arab world, there are, the numbers, if I remember correctly, there's over 200 million active Arabs online in the Arab world. And that's around 5 to 6% of the internet population. When you look at the content, sadly, the content does not reflect that. So there's 0.5 to 0.6, less than 1%, 0.5 to 0.6% of the internet content is Arabic, whereas 5 to 6% of the internet population is Arab. So again, a massive gap in terms of quality content online. And again, that's an opportunity for people to start moving into that space.
Yeah, and if I may kind of just add in with a follow-up question of my own, because based on conversations with startups and founders that are around that in that space, and they have that opportunity to kind of go into Arabic content or quality Arabic content and make use of that opportunity. I think a lot of the debate that happens has to do with the user behavior when it comes to Arab speakers, right? In the sense that they might be able to consume content in Arabic, however, they're less willing to pay for services or products or whatever it is online. And I just want to kind of get a quick share with that, and just quickly get your thoughts on that. If that is something that is true, is it true across different industries, or is it simply not true across, for example, things like fashion or beauty or so? How can founders kind of get a little bit more insight on that?
So on the personal level, I think there's again, it's what we're looking at. So with that stat, I think for a younger crowd, generally, Arab or not, a younger crowd does not want to / have the capability to pay. But what I've seen, for example, in certain industries is, yes, there is a tendency to move towards a subscription model for a certain percentage of the population. And this depends on what you're selling. So I've seen this, for example, in the medical websites, for example. So they have a paid subscription, and there's a free subscription and a paid subscription, and their numbers are growing. Again, it's a purely Arabic website. So I think it just depends on the audience and what they're offering and what is also out there as well. And down with time, I think this is just a segment that will grow. It's not something that if people think that this has to be free, or they're not willing to pay now, we're moving towards this subscription-based model where you have a low entry point, but you're looking at volumes. You have a $5, $10, $15 monthly or subscription, and you're just building on that online. And I see a lot of businesses move to that model versus the free model, or versus a one-time big payment. So again, back to what your product or service is, just running some more research. I think the best insights you can get is looking at what's happening in the West. So when it comes to digital presence, I think they have a few years ahead of us. So if you look at the type of user behavior in the US or in Europe, that gives you an indication of what's coming here 1 or 2 or 3 years down the line. I think that would be the best from a user behavior, and also from a topical perspective, meaning what kinds of topics or questions or interests will your target audience have in the near future. This is some way of getting insights into that.
That's true. That's definitely very insightful, Nazim. Thank you for that. I think the last question, and again, just a final call. If anyone has any questions that they'd like Mazen to address, I think we have a couple of minutes, so feel free to go ahead and post them on the Q&A. But one question that we received had to do with B2B businesses, right? Or startups that are directly offering a service or a product to businesses, and a lot of their kind of acquisition efforts are basically cold calls or meetings. It's offline. And the question is it something, does investing in content and SEO and optimization in that sense, is that an activity that makes sense for them? If not, then, or if it makes sense under certain conditions, what are those conditions, and how can founders better make that decision?
Okay, so for a B2B environment, I think there's a lot more that I'd like to know before, but I'll give you generally how it works. So, for example, I started as a B2B service, right? So SEO is a B2B service. The fastest, best way for me to get business when I first started was referral-based, offline content. So referral-based marketing is, for startups, is your best friend, because because that comes through a personal recommendation, or your network, whether they're existing clients, your networking, your friends, etc. It has the highest chance of conversion, meaning it's the best way for your time. As we started growing, we started investing into our own SEO, we started investing into our online presence, etc. And we do get inquiries come in, but the time required to nurture that relationship, to have 1 or 2 or 3 meetings, find a proposal, negotiate about it, and then close the deal, so that time is much bigger than a referral-based inquiry. So I say, as a startup in the B2B world, I think your first focus, because you need to get on your feet, you want to stand up, is probably referral marketing, keeping in mind that whoever you talk to wants to go back and know more about you. So they at the very least have a basic website up that looks nice, that the content is well written, there's no spelling mistakes. Visually, it's decent. It doesn't have to be over the top, but at least visually it's appealing. The basics are there. There is some information in the about section. There's some information about how it works or what you do or what you offer. So these basics need to be there because people want to make sure that you're legit. You know, you just want to make sure that this business does exist. It does what it says it does, etc. So based on the B2B sector that I've talked to, again, what I saw is the fastest, best way to spend time marketing at the beginning is referral marketing, because the conversion rates and the speed at which that business comes in is much faster. And then as you grow, then you start looking at all these different other angles to start growing your business in more geographic locations, reaching a larger audience set, etc. So that would be my advice on a high level. Again, there's many more ifs and buts, but with more details.
Definitely. And I think, I mean, a lot of, I know you were trying to kind of answer a lot of those questions. And I think just to kind of point out to the founders that are out there, that a lot of these questions is very much a case-by-case basis. There isn't necessarily a scenario where someone can give you a blanket answer that's 100% accurate or inaccurate. And a lot of it kind of comes down to you doing your research and you understanding more about your customer segment and what makes sense for them. And before we wrap up, I think we have just one last question that have to do with putting money behind content generation in terms of advertising it and pushing it out. And obviously there's a lot of, there's a budget that's associated with production, whether you're paying someone to write your blogs or to shoot your videos or to do your podcast, all of those things. However, when it comes to kind of promoting it and putting it out there, how important is it or how necessary is it to actually, for example, do paid marketing for the content that you generate, for the blog posts that you write up? What are your thoughts on that, or how can you best advise our founders?
Yeah, I think again, back to where you stand, your financials, your priorities, many caveats with that. So again, from our end, for the first 3-4 years of operation, I never paid to boost something online. Didn't do AdWords. I didn't need to. So whatever we published was organic, shared it organically. You know, there's many ideas that you could do. So example, I'm part of a network with a number of startup businesses. We have our LinkedIn group. So whenever somebody puts something on LinkedIn, everybody goes in, comments, shares, likes, because that engagement just amplifies the message. So these are things that you can do as part of Sharjah, for example, just to help and support each other and get that organic visibility. I think again, as a startup, you have to be strategic about where you spend your budget. The marketing activities highly depend on your target. It's a B2C, then absolutely yes. You need that visibility. You need that brand to be out there. Especially once you narrow down your targeting to a specific group, then you can promote to them. If you're a B2B, then it might not be the most effective way of spending your money. So again, it's crucial that you understand where you are, you understand what your sales funnel looks like, what your sales cycle looks at, how long does it take to close a client. Just be smart about how you decide. It's very difficult for me to give an answer, again, a blanket answer to that. So sharing my experiences, this is how we went about it. This is what we're currently doing. Rarely do we boost. I don't think we ever did. We paid for a social media boost. It's worth playing around with every now and then. I'm not saying not to, but what I'm saying is what we're doing right now is working for us in terms of building that pipeline And maybe if we grew internal capacity to handle more, then I can go into mass scaling. That could work, or mass advertising. It could work. It's just being strategic about how you're spending your advertising money, and what comes first, and how fast are the different kinds of leads you get through these different channels. How long does it take for them to convert?
Yeah, and I think, I think the exercise of prioritization is a constant loop that founders are are stuck in, just because of the limited resources. And I mean, one of the things that we kind of preach and try to enforce, to our founders, is that you don't necessarily have to be doing everything at the same time, right? You, as a startup, by default, you have very limited resources, time, money, manpower, to be pursuing a lot of those things at the same time, specifically at an earlier stage. So prioritization, I think, definitely is key, in terms of a lot of those decisions that you need to make as founders. Finally, Mazen, I'd love to thank you for a lot of the very valuable insight that you've shared with us today. A lot of the tools and resources that you've put up, and again, these are on the chat, so you guys can kind of go back and go through these tools. Just to kind of answer someone from the audience's question, we're going to be putting up this session up on YouTube in a couple of days, so probably by next week. You can log into the Sharjah page on YouTube and view these sessions, not just this one, but the ones we've done in the past weeks as well. And again, Mazen was so kind to share his Twitter and LinkedIn profile, so feel free to kind of connect with him and know more about WebQuest and the great work that they do. Thank you, Mazen, so much for today. I think these were a lot of valuable insights, so thank you.
Yeah, please. Yeah, thank you. It was great talking to you, and I hope everybody found it useful. Please feel free to reach out if you have questions. I'm happy to answer them. And yeah, looking forward to connect online.
Definitely. Thank you, Mazen, and thank you everyone who joined us today. Have a good day.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.